Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today we're getting into our second to final position group for 2025 draft scouting. So we are going to be looking today at defensive tackles. We've got some very good groups to finish this up. We just had running backs. This is one of the other very strong classes here. There's some good high-end talent. I think the class is relatively deep. I would say right now, probably 9 players that have a pretty good NFL career. And we're talking about this obviously way before the NFL draft. So that says a lot about how deep this class is and how much is there, especially compared to some recent years where the talent just hasn't always been in this class. You've had a couple guys that are really good, but it just hasn't always had the depth. And so it's going to be an exciting one. I've got 11 prospects today that we're going to talk about. I originally had 14. Couple guys just didn't make the list. There were too many questions about whether they would really even be draftable at the end of this year. So I don't want to, have 300 guys on my board, so I skipped them. And then, unfortunately, Dante Corleone, Cincinnati, just recently ended up having some health issues, I think relating to blood clots, and is out indefinitely. And I figured that out actually right after I finished my evaluation on him. So he will not be on the list for that reason, because unfortunately, with that considered, you just don't know what the future is going to hold for him. But hopefully things get figured out there. Hopefully he's able to play and the medical problems are resolved permanently, and we can maybe talk about him sometime in the future, whether this year or the year after. But that's what we've got today. We've got defensive tackles. We've got quarterbacks next week. And then we're going to have one final video, I'm hoping, to bring in maybe some of the prospects that we missed over the course of this. I'm now up to, I think, 15 guys at this point. Might be less, might be more. We'll see. But probably got 2 more videos on summer scouting following this one. So with that all said, let's go ahead. Let's jump into this. We've got Rylie Mills for our first guy. And unfortunately, I believe Rylie Mills is my lowest ranked prospect I've scouted so far. It has nothing to do with the effort that he gives or how hard he's trying. This is a guy who plays with a high motor. There's things to like in that regard. But it's just the fact that when I watched him, it just didn't seem like anything was effective. It felt like almost in every single category that I was grading, he was below average, right? Other than your physical tools, right? Like he's got a long frame. He's got a lot to work with there. He's 295, so he's got room to grow. So there's not really like a clear limitation. And he's pretty athletic. He can move pretty well, but it just felt like his game was really far away from being at the level you want to be at. So getting into my notes here, I've already noted the long frame. He's got room to add size. He has good overall speed, not an elite athlete, but a lot to work with there as a pass rusher. And this is a guy who's going to give constant effort. He's also very active with his hands. He doesn't just always sit on guys and say, you know what, I'm just going to try to win with power. That's what you find with a lot of guys, especially on the interior. And that's what really ends up being a limitation often. But unfortunately, there's just a lot of concerns here with Rylie Mills' projections. So, first of him, he's pretty lean for a defensive tackle, especially for one that's 6'5". So, he's muscular, but compared to the size that you want, I think he's a little bit below what you're expecting. He's also a guy that in run defense, he's often driven back. He's not able to hold his ground. That is not going to be a good thing, because you're going to have offensive linemen like pushing open rushing lanes and giving the run game a good chance to succeed against their defense. So it's not something you want to see. He's not a guy that really has an arsenal to get off of blocks. He doesn't have the counters to do it. He's often just getting grabbed and controlled by blockers. Unfortunately, as a pass rusher, what happens a lot of the time is that he'll engage with someone, and if he can't get through a gap, he pulls off and he tries to run around and find a gap. And he's just, unfortunately, for what he tries to be, which is a gap penetrator, he's not very effective at, especially as a 6'5" defensive tackle. You just don't have that size, right? When we're talking about gap penetrators, you're usually talking about maybe some smaller guys, not guys who are super tall. It's going to make it a lot harder. And he just doesn't have the strength at the end of the day to break through once he starts to get into that gap. So there's big concerns there. That's really what his entire game has to revolve around, because he just doesn't have an arsenal of pass rush moves. He doesn't have ways that he's winning against blockers, and so he has to find a way to get to the quarterback with the least resistance, something we talked about a while back, if you remember, with Princely Umamielen. And I probably said that wrong, but forgive me, right? That was a big reason why I wasn't a huge fan of his, because it felt like he would engage with someone, he would often lose, and then he'd back up, he'd take the super long route to try to get through another way, and it just wasn't working. And it was a lot of the same for Rylie Mills as a defensive tackle. Also a guy that, going back to the mass, he's not someone who's going to win with power that often. I just did not see that on film. And with all the D grades here, there wasn't really a super impressive element to his game aside from that effort. And so is there the potential for Rylie Mills to get better? There is, and I'm not going to say that he cannot improve his status from this. Like, he has got the work ethic, he's got the size, he's got the speed to have an impact. Unfortunately, I just didn't see anything on film that told me that he's close to that right now. So we'll see. I don't know how many years of eligibility he has left. Maybe this is the guy that returns if he can, but I don't believe he can. When you're entering the draft at almost 24, it's not super often that you can come back. But we also had the COVID year, so I'd have to do my research on that. I didn't really look at his status as far as what year he's in, but he has played for a while, and that's what I do know. Now, getting into the summary for him, I said that he's an energetic defensive tackle that needs to add power and refinement to his game to reach the next level. He has a long frame with plenty of room to bulk up, and the effort is there to show he can grow. Unfortunately, this is where the positives end. He rarely wins with power. He's often resorting to abandoning blocks and searching for a gap in the line. While he has active hands, he doesn't have a pass rush arsenal, and that severely limits his play. This forces him to find his success in gap penetration, which has shown some mixed results. In run defense, he occasionally has the strength to anchor, but he's often moved into the second level of the defense. If plays endure longer than expected, Mills consistently makes his way towards the ball and assists his teammates. In order for him to carve out a role in the NFL, he needs to get stronger and learn proper technique to battle with blockers. His relentless motor is exciting to watch, but he'll have to show results of improved play this season. So my comp for him, I actually took this off of 24/7 Sports. They had this scouting report going into college and looked up stuff on this player, and he's turned out actually very similar to this Henry Anderson. I watched a little bit of him, read his actual draft profile coming into the NFL. These are both players that were tall, they were lean defensive linemen, but they had relentless motors. They forced blockers to constantly be on their game. You still have to give him respect as a blocker. These are both guys that had good speed, but they really struggled with the explosion and the quick lateral movement, which is why he's not going to get much more than a B for his athleticism, mostly average there, aside from his speed. They're also both guys who lacked ideal power to play inside and could be washed out of plays. And ultimately, they needed to develop a pass rush skill set. So that was my comp for him. Right now, I have him as a D-, so that is like a 6th to 7th round grade as a prospect. He can definitely go up from there. Film I watched for him was Ohio State, USC, and Oregon State from 2023. And then just to make sure you guys know these categories on the right, their size, athleticism, run defense, pass rush, shedding. So this is going to consider in run defense and pass rushing, although you can have some different results in those. And then physicality, and then the overall grade. So that's how that works. All your D grades are day 3. D- is 6th through 7th round. D is 5th. D+ is 4th. And then A, B, and C is for 1st, 2nd, 3rd. So that's how they go. And then you have S tier. We won't have any guys like that today, but those are like your elite first round prospects that should go at the beginning of the round. Now, getting to our next guy, probably the last one I'm not super excited about, but still some stuff to work with here, and he has some good positives in his game. Gonna butcher the name, but we'll call him Peebles. Keep it simple here. But this was a guy who's, undersized, but decent athlete. And, I think he's someone who plays with urgency. It's one of my first positives on him. And that leads to good results often if you know a little bit about how to use it. And a lot of these smaller guys, they have to learn that to succeed. You're often going to find when you're scouting a draft class, your bigger guys aren't as refined because they win with power, they win with size. Your smaller guys are going to be a lot more calculated because they have to be to succeed. And you kind of just wish you could combine both of them. And that's usually the kind of player that ends up going, maybe early in the first or in the middle of the first. But getting into Peebles here, super high motor with this guy. If you watch him, there is like no way you can miss that. He plays with absolute urgency. The way he plays is very similar to a bull in the china shop, which isn't a perfect thing, but it's pretty good. You like to see that because he's going to cause havoc. He also has a decent arsenal of pass rush moves. It is more chaotic, but is good to see he has something to work with. He occasionally will flash a swim move, which is probably one of his main go-tos when he pulls something off. Most of the time, it's just this violent hands fighting from him. He also gets off blocks really well when he's rushing the passer, and he's very good at penetrating the offensive line. So this is a guy who does succeed in gap penetration. That's why he's going to be graded out higher and is a 4th-round prospect to me right now. The concerns are kind of obvious here, though. He's below average frame and mass. He's a mostly average athlete, although a little bit above average, and he has nothing more than really average power. So this stuff really hurts him, specifically in run defense. He gets out of position often against the run as well. He gets focused on just trying to break through the line. I think we have that for a couple other prospects we'll talk about. But sometimes, you don't have to get in the backfield. If the guy is not running your direction, you don't want to get into the backfield. You want to be trying to move off the blocker towards where the guy's running, because otherwise you're just completely out of the play. So that's kind of an issue with how he defends the run. He's also a guy that when he is not penetrating the line, when he is trying to get in position to make the tackle around the line of scrimmage, he just doesn't do well getting off of blocks. He's mostly average in that regard. The shedding grade, it's probably weighted higher because of what he does as a pass rusher. So by the time he gets off blocks, usually he's just mostly out of the play, or he has to get off in a way that puts him wildly out of position. He arguably needs to be just completely retaught how to play in run defense. So this is not, to me, a guy who plays full-time in the NFL. Even if he could overcome the size issues, I just think that there's too much for him to learn right now to be a full-time guy. It would take a long time, and you got to project that happens. It's hard to project it when the results were this way. He also has awareness at times that appears below average. He doesn't really follow always where the play's going. As a pass rusher, while he has some stuff to work with, he needs to develop a wider arsenal of pass rushers. He has to have more ways he can win, because he's got to make up for so much, especially going from a college level where he was still undersized against a lot of guys, coming into the NFL where you're going to be going up against the biggest and the baddest of what you would have faced on Saturdays. So big issue there. He's got to develop more, even if he has some already. That size just simply doesn't translate to the NFL well. And so it's hard to raise his ceiling much higher than where he is right now. So I think there's things he can do to improve, but there's some big questions about what he can be at the next level. My summary for him, I say he's an undersized defensive tackle who specializes as a gap penetrator. He plays with a really high motor and makes up for his physical ailments. He has a few pass rush moves to his arsenal, constantly rotating between these to overwhelm blockers. He finds his success when he can penetrate through gaps and force his way into the backfield, something he showed often on film. Unfortunately, he will have a limited ceiling because of his play in run defense. He's often out of position as he focuses more on penetrating the backfield than following the ball. He can show a lack of awareness and is often completely out of position. When he attempts to follow rushers, he's often pushed into the second level and can be taken to the ground. It's hard to expect that to improve enough to be an all-round starter. As mentioned before, He's undersized in about every metric, and he's not far above average as an athlete. To succeed at the next level, he must refine his pass rushing skill set and make a living in the backfield. If he can do that, he can fill a valuable rotational role in the NFL. So there is upside there. It's just a question of whether he's going to get to it, as it is for basically every player. But my comp form, I went with Cameron Young here. This was a guy that compared pretty well, other than maybe a little bit with size. Peebles is a little bit smaller, but these are both guys that specialize as pass rushers who could specifically penetrate gaps again to the backfield. Also, both players who had really high motors, just did not have ideal power, and were not really great athletes, more so mostly average athletes. So my grade for Peebles, once again, is going to be a 4th round pick. And the film I watched here was Clemson, Notre Dame, and Florida State, all from the 2023 season. Now, we've got 9 more guys we're going to talk about here, and these are players that I see having a long-term role in the NFL. There are a lot of people on this list that I think pretty safely you can say that about. The first guy is someone that I feel like I've scouted like 3 times now in different cycles, and that's Nazir Stackhouse. So he's a player that going into the scouting this year, I kind of felt like I knew what he was, and he ended up being pretty much exactly that. This is a really good run defender that's probably not going to do a ton past that. He's like your prototypical nose tackle, what you'd think about when you see one of those guys. He has a really big frame, tons of mass on him, 320 pounds, not the biggest in this class, to be fair. There's a lot of heavyweights out in this class, but still a really big guy, especially if you compare it to what we had last year. Definitely going to be more of a nose tackle in the NFL. He moves really well for that size too. So that athleticism, well, it's a C- here. That's going off more of like, what would you expect from an average sized guy? If we're talking about what you expect from a 320 pound nose tackle, it's pretty good. It's more like a B maybe. This is also someone who has good power to drive blockers back. He does well at that. He can get guys off their anchor, and he can push him. He has something to work with there. Against the run, he's a guy that consistently has good play. He's not someone that you're going to be looking back at a play and saying, wow, this guy really shit the bed. You're just not going to say that about him. He's consistently good. And so if you have issues in run defense, this is the kind of player you invest in. And we might need to hear that as Jaguars fans, by the way, for all the people watching who are Jaguars fans here, which is most of you. This is a team that struggled a bit at the end of the season in run defense on that defensive line. Plenty of reasons for that, but the players they've invested in right now are very much weighted towards pass rushing. You know, Eric Armstead, that's where he makes his money. Devon Hamilton, more of a balanced player, but we got to see how he bounces back. Mason Smith was someone that, if you go back to my breakdown on him after the draft, when we really got deep into it, it's a guy that has a lot of upside as a pass rusher and probably at most will be an average run defender. So Stackhouse makes some sense to look at. This is a guy to probably watch as a potential good pick, maybe in the 3rd round, which is where I have him graded. Getting back to my notes here, though, as far as anchoring in run defense, consistently is going to hold his point. This is not a guy that you're going to be driving back into the 2nd level. Just not going to happen other than freak plays occasionally. Also someone who did not miss a tackle in the entire 2023 season. I believe he had 7 the year before, so it was a major improvement. I might be wrong on that number, but I believe that was Stackhouse. So big improvement there. This is a reliable player that you know what you're getting with. And a lot of these concerns are just kind of pounding home what he is, right? And what he's not as well. So getting into those concerns, this was one guy, and you might see it a bit with the picture here, appears to have small hands. We'll see, of course, a while down the road when we get to the combine, but I was a little bit concerned about that. Don't think he has big hands, so that could hurt him a little bit, especially as a rusher. He's also someone who's a mostly average athlete, given his size. Not that shocking. He also, of course, given his pass rush grade here of an F, lacks an arsenal of pass rush moves. Just does not feel like someone that has taken any step forward as a pass rusher. If he's going to win, it's going to be him bulldozing a guy who just can't match his strength. And those guys, they don't play long in the NFL. So I don't think he's going to be in those situations often. I don't see him as a guy that's going to be out there making sacks happen every other game. I just don't expect that from him. Pretty much no production as a pass rusher. So that's kind of what you're getting in Stackhouse here. He also struggles to shed blocks. That was an area he was not super strong in. So that's kind of his big limitation as a run defender. If it wasn't for that, he might be a guy that gets that S tier grade there. He's also someone who, for his size, not a super physical player, not someone that you're going to be looking at and saying, wow, he's really just setting the tone of this game. I just didn't see that. I also don't think it was like a massive negative, but didn't stand out like you'd expect for a 320-pound guy. He's also someone that doesn't have great balance, so you can see him occasionally come down to the ground. He also feels like a player who very clearly has hit his ceiling as a prospect, sticking around in college, being part of a championship organization and wanting to be there. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? That's fine. But you just got to realize, like, this is what you're getting with this player. You kind of know before the draft. I think this is someone that when we come back to him, maybe February or March of next year, it's going to be very much the same thing as what we talked about now. So unlikely to be a full-time starter, given the lack of a pass rush arsenal. But if you need a nose tackle, you need someone to anchor against the run, this is your guy. He's going to clog the middle. He's going to help you out a lot there, and that's valuable in the NFL. You just got to understand that's what he is. So my summary for him, say he's a big body defensive tackle that specializes as a run defender. He moves well for his size and demonstrates good power on the field. In run defense, he can hold his point, clogging the middle of the line and forcing running backs to bounce outside. He's one of the soundest players in that facet of the game, which you can also credit to his perfect tackling in 2023. Unfortunately, he's a limited prospect, showing virtually nothing aside from power as a pass rusher. He lacks an arsenal of moves and often gets stalled early without an answer. In 2023, Stackhouse had 2 sacks, but those were the only 2 pressures he had all season. He also lacks a mean streak, showing minimal physicality for what you'd expect of a big defensive lineman. Given that Stackhouse feels like a refined run defender and has little going as a pass rusher, it makes you wonder if he's reached his ceiling. He'll have to prove that wrong to raise his ceiling as an NFL draft prospect. So my comp here was someone I believe was in this last class, was Fabian Lovett. These are both older, big defensive tackles that were just consistently good against the run, but both guys that just didn't have a pass rush arsenal. They didn't have a game that was really developing much there, but in run defense, they did well. They were able to hold their point against blockers, and they have ample power to at least cause a little bit of havoc, or maybe as a pass rusher, push the offensive line back a little bit. But I think that's kind of the ceiling you're getting here. So that's my pro comp for him. My grade for him was a 3rd round pick, middle of the 3rd round as well. And then the film I watched, South Carolina, Missouri, and Alabama, all from the 2023 season. So we're going to get now into a South Carolina prospect, and there's been some good players out of there on the defensive line, so someone to watch for sure. And I know this guy's been kind of thrown out as a sleeper so far, which is why he made it on my list and ended up having good film, and that's why he's on here. Wrong one here. Here we go. Tonka Hemingway makes it on here as middle of the 3rd round pick, so got that fixed now. This is a guy that's a good athlete, not absolutely incredible size, but enough to work with, right? He does have long arms, and maybe that size should go up a little bit, but still can add on some mass as a player, so maybe more of a C+. But overall, like, good stuff to work with, and some tools that you can see developing on the field. But getting into positives with Hemingway here, he's a guy that he's got long arms, going to help him battle blockers. You see it on film making an impact. It's very clear. He has active hands as a rusher, not 100% of the time, but often active hands. He has a very good swim move as well. He uses this consistently. If you watch his highlights, you're going to find that swim move on there. It's one of his go-to moves. He also has a lot of core power. He can battle with guys with his upper body. So that's going to be nice to see, especially, you know, if you're just going toe-to-toe with someone in run defense trying to hold your position. He also has good movement skills for his size, so you like to see that. He's obviously got to put on a little bit more weight, maybe get up to like 305. I think that might be a good size for him, but still a good athlete. He is very quick once he's off the line. The speed he reacts with isn't always consistent, but he has some suddenness when he gets going, and that's enough to sometimes win very early in reps, and he could end up being that guy that makes the big play right off the bat, doesn't give the quarterback enough time to make a good decision. In run defense, he does well holding his ground. He has that core strength to be able to battle with guys. He's one of the first people off the line often, not always, but often. And the final positives I wrote here was that he plays a good physical game. You can hear the hits on broadcast. You like to see that, right? But not that elite physical game. So still good, not to the highest level. As far as concerns for him, the biggest thing I think that hurts him and why he doesn't get a positive as a run defender, because I really think there's still stuff to work with there, he just misses so many tackles. He just, like, when he's one-on-one with a guy, if there's no one else involved, 90% of the time he's missing it. I don't understand fully why. It's like his arms hit and then they don't do anything after that point. That is the biggest concern I probably have with Hemingway as a prospect. He just doesn't make tackles, and it's kind of like we talked about with Jarion Jones when we were scouting him after the draft. He's smart, right? Like, he is a good player mentally, but he doesn't make the tackles and run defense even when he knows where the players are going. If he can figure that out, he's going to be a great slot corner, right? Like, you love to see that as a potential, but it's a big issue, and it's not one that always gets fixed, especially when you hit the NFL. And for Hemingway, that's a reason why he is rated where he is, right? There's more upside here, but he's just got to be a better tackler. And it's specifically those one-on-one situations. He can help out when he's got help and he's got other people there, but he's not the guy that's going to make the one-on-one tackles. Also, someone who does not have a huge arsenal of pass rush moves. You see the swim move often. It's kind of limited to that. He can also get content at times battling with just power, which goes back to why I said he has active hands, but not all the time. There's some plays where he just gets too content. He's also someone who doesn't show impressive mental processing. He can get fooled on plays, so you want to see him improve there, and he's not someone who gets off blocks and run defense too easily. So probably part of the reason why those tackles aren't always happening, because he's getting off blocks late or just not at all. So getting into my summary for Hemingway here, I say he's a lengthy defensive tackle with a lot of upside as an all-around player. He has long arms to help him against blockers and often plays with active hands. He is a strong player, having good core strength and holding his own against blockers in the run game while displacing them on his one-on-one rushes. He moves well, and he flashes suddenness that can catch blockers off guard, as he's consistently one of the first to engage in battle. Given his strength, he plays a good physical game that keeps him in the mix. Hemingway has a few clear areas for improvement. He sometimes struggles to track the ball on plays, being fooled by fakes, and just missing plays altogether. He struggles to make tackles in close quarters, rarely finishing the play without other defenders being in the mix. This drastically hurts his performance in run defense. Finally, he has a limited arsenal of pass rush moves, just showing pure power and his swim move. There isn't a reason that he couldn't improve in these areas, so he remains a high upside prospect with the floor of a fringe starter, which is where I think he is right now. First player here that I haven't had a comp for, it was really hard to find them for some of these defensive tackles. I also don't know a ton of players super well at the position, especially given that we've just kind of had a couple high-end guys recent years and then not a ton else. Maybe last year we had some, but not a ton of great defensive tackle classes coming out recently. So I didn't have a comp here, but he is a guy I see as a third round player. He could work his way up into maybe being a middle of the second round guy. Could go higher technically. There's not really that big limitation on his game, but just got to see more out of him. The film I watched for him, I watched North Carolina, Georgia, and Missouri, all from the 2023 season. Now, we're going to take a bit of a jump up the board as far as round grades, and we're going to have a surprising player here for where guys are ranked. And this is one I feel pretty confident about, although I know it will upset some people who are a fan of him, which is quite a few. It's Deone Walker. This is someone who has a ton of hype because he's a huge guy that at moments looks explosive on the field. He's quick with his hands. He can have that little bit of burst. It's just not something that he consistently keeps up. And it's just the way he is built, I feel like, and the way he plays, I just don't know how long it can be sustained in the NFL. And I don't know if it's really a game-breaking style of player. I'm not fully convinced on that. So, well, I'll get into my notes on why, but just as far as the build, right? 6'6" is phenomenal. Like, he's got long arms as well, tons of length. But this is a guy who is super top heavy, crazy top heavy. Like, everything is in his belly as a prospect. That's not good. And you compare him to other guys who are close to this weight. Like, he's listed as 348, okay? He's not even T'Vondre Sweat size. We're not, obviously, T'Vondre Sweat's massive. But we've got some other guys that are big that carry it 10 times better than Walker does. And you're going to kind of see this as we go through these final prospects. But that was a big issue for me, and why the size isn't like blue chip S-tier top end size, because it's just the way it's distributed and how it impacts him as a player. So getting into the positives though, like I said, tons of length, absurd amount of mass. He plays everywhere on the defensive line. They line him up everywhere. Now, people get excited a lot of the time when they see that, but it doesn't matter if you're not effective, right? That's the big question when we see guys lining up in those other situations. For example, like one of these guys, there was a play I think I saw them drop in coverage, and they weren't good in coverage, right? But they just happened to be thrown to. It doesn't mean that they're incredible, right? Sometimes a fluke play happens here and there. You have to be able to determine what's the fluke and what's real. You know, you talk about like Nick Scourton, a guy that I probably ranked too low. I'll go back to and probably have to bring him up a little bit. But Scourton, like, they would have him drop into coverage, and you could say, well, that's cool. He's able to do that, but he doesn't do it at a high level. It's not what he's built for. He's like, what, 50 pounds too heavy for it? So it just doesn't really make a ton of sense for him as a player. And it's kind of the same thing a little bit here with Walker, where you put him on the edge, that's cool, but he's got to be good there. I don't know if he was really that great there. Now, getting back to positive, though, because I keep going off and saying bad things, and I don't think he's a terrible player, right? Middle of the second round guy for me right now. He is a shockingly good mover for his size. Even with that low grade for athleticism, this is a player that moves faster than you'd expect, and that get off and rushes is incredibly impressive. Like, if people are not ready for that, they're gonna get crushed by him. He is a twitchy player. You don't see that from 348-pound guys all that often. He also has some creativity with his rush. He has some moves that he goes to. He's often trying to forklift defenders. It works really well. He has that core strength to just dominate them in that regard. He's also someone who is just simply too big to deal with for certain players. He had legit sack reduction in 2023. So the results are on the field. And as a run defender, this is a guy who's built to plug gaps. He is built to make it hard for running backs to run up the middle. He has the power to shed blocks and tackle, and he is super physical about when he does that. If he gets close to the ball carrier, he's going to rip him down to the dirt. So there's some very positive grades here, and I actually think a lot of it comes against the run, where bare minimum, I think he can be a good player there who occasionally has some flashes as a pass rusher. But that's mostly what I see it as right now, is flashes. Getting into the concerns here, he's a guy who plays super tall. The leverage is not a positive with him. He does not bend that much at the waist, but imagine why he doesn't do that. Most of his weight is up top compared to other players. Super top heavy. That hurts his balance immensely. His moves, while he has some creativity there, they're mostly ineffective because he just kind of lacks the ultimate speed. He keeps blockers in the place. So he might, chop a guy or have a nice move, but he doesn't, talking about his feet and where he's moving on the field, not his upper half, he's not quick enough in that regard to get past blockers consistently. So a blocker can lose at a point and still be in the play just because they're faster than him. So that's not good for Walker. This is a guy as well that just doesn't push the line nearly as often as he should. There's plays where he just doesn't have much penetration. His pursuit speed as a prospect is pretty much non-existent. I think the sole issue, though, in run defense, because we gave him a pretty high grade there, it's that range to tackle. I don't think he's going to be someone who's going to close that well against running backs. Even with that little bit of burst he has, it's not enough all the time to get it done. So that's kind of the big limitation here. He's also someone that just is not going to be able to go an entire game playing with high level effort. You see it on the field where when he's out there a lot, just kind of dies down as far as that effort. And it's not saying there's anything wrong about his work ethic. Absolutely nothing is wrong there that I saw on film. It's just that he's too big to be able to play 50 snaps a game all at a high level. You're just not going to see that. I do think that even with the build he has that's pretty wacky and got some issues, that there's potential here. Like, he can drop 15 pounds and probably be a really good player. I still think, you could get up to being an average athlete for just any defensive tackle, and you're still going to be massive, and you're still going to be able to forklift guys, and you're going to have more of that explosiveness. You're going to be able to play the whole game. But right now, you got to ask yourself, how long is Deone Walker going to play at this size? And I'll just be honest, I'm a little bit biased sometimes against these guys. So keep that in mind here. When we have these freak guys that don't clearly dominate all the time on film, or they have big questions about him, it's just not the kind of player I'm taking a shot on the first round. I want to make sure I nail those picks, and I try to put guys in the first round that I feel super confident on, because if you miss your first round pick, you're probably going to have a pretty crappy draft class. You don't want to miss that. And so where do I feel comfortable taking Walker? It's more of a second round guy. I could understand if a team took him early second. I'm probably more in the middle of the second because there's just big questions there, and I'm not sure that he's someone who's going to go out, dominate during his rookie contract, and earn a ton of money on that second deal. I just have some big questions about that. But getting into my summary here, another guy without a comp. He's a massive human being with unexpected movement skills. He has experience playing everywhere on the defensive line, has been effective in those split roles. He isn't fast, but he's got twitch, and he gets creative with his pass rush play. Specifically, he excels in forklifting defenders and driving them off their anchor into the quarterback's lap. Given his top-heavy build, Walker has great core strength, which can be too much for average blockers. He has a good stat line in 2023 with 8 sacks on the season and positive grades from PFF. He gets what... Sorry, give me 1 second here. I've hid my evaluation here. Okay, here we go. While he's not an incredible tackler, he'll rip anyone to the ground that gets within his range. He has obvious problems with playing around 350 pounds, though. He struggles immensely with leverage, failing to bend at the waist and providing a natural advantage to blockers. Given his lack of speed, his pass rush moves don't have the desired effect, and blockers can stay in front of him. Walker doesn't have great balance, going down to the ground too often because of his immense upper body weight. While I would generally commend his run defense, He has limited range and often needs rushers to come to him. Walker has played a lot of snaps at his size, but I'm not sure how long he can keep that up. I would like to see him get closer to 330 pounds, which could retain most of his immense power and give him the movement ability that pushes him over the edge. So, once again, second round prospect to me. A lot of people have him as a first. Some people have him as a blue chip early first guy, and I just don't see that right now. Maybe he proves me wrong. I hope he does. But second round guy for me at this point. I watched Georgia, Missouri, and Clemson all from the 2023 season. Now, getting into our top guys here. So, I've got Howard Cross. Actually, I think still same grade as Deone Walker, but getting close to our top 5. This was someone who, unfortunately, is undersized. That's going to hurt him as a prospect, but he knows how to use what he has. He is a very good, refined player at this point. I think someone you kind of know what you're getting out of. There's just that little bit of risk with him being a smaller player, right? 6'1" is the listed size. A lot of times, colleges put that higher than what he actually is. So is this going to be a guy who comes in maybe below 6 foot? That could be a big problem, right? 288 pounds as well. You've got some concerns there with size. But getting into my positives here with him, which there are quite a few, he's quick to fire off the line of scrimmage. He has active hands right off the bat. He's always trying to gain any kind of advantage he can. Relentless motor in that regard. He is a smart, experienced player. He uses his length well. He has long arms, which kind of makes up for some of the size deficiencies otherwise. And he can shed blocks against the run. It helps him immensely there. He can make blockers miss as well when they lunge. He will make you pay for not being a sound technician as a blocker. If you're not that, he's going to win early. He also strings together his moves well. So this is not a guy who just throws a move, it doesn't work, and he's like, well, that sucks, I'll get him next time. He's going to keep going. He will throw everything and the kitchen sink at blockers. He plays with good leverage. He can cause chaos in the backfield, and once again, plays with that super high motor. So a lot of things to really like here with Howard Cross III, but obviously you've got some clear issues here with just the upside of the prospect, because you're kind of close to what it is right now. He is an older player. He's going to be 24 by the time his first season starts in the NFL. His length is mostly average, although the arm length is a little bit better, but shorter prospect, so it kind of hurts him a little bit there. And he's also someone who could add mass. He can be overpowered by blockers, so in run defense, it's going to be a bit of an issue with holding the point. So definitely have to see that improve a bit, but generally, I do think that he overperforms what you would expect there. He's also someone who is just not going to win that often with power rushes. His spin move is very slow and lethargic as well. Might have just been one really bad one I watched for all I know, or a couple bad ones, but what I saw there was not good. He also lacks good pursuit speed. So athleticism, I still think is good. Like, he's a smaller guy, that helps him out a lot, but not really like that elite top-end athleticism. He's also a decent tackler, but I think he can improve a little bit there, so not a huge concern, but an area where he could get better. And I just can't see him being a productive player against blockers who are able to combine good size and sound play. I could see him being a guy that comes out into some games, it's like, well, you had 0 pressures, you had 1 tackle, and you're out there for 40 snaps. Like, what happened? I think that's possible, just given the talent you're going to go up against at the NFL level. He's also, unfortunately, someone who can lose track of the ball at times. So, getting to my summary here, first of all, pro comp is more of an upside comp. Grady Jarrett's a great player, want to get that out of the way. But getting into my summary, I say he's a refined defensive tackle with a relentless motor. He fires off the line of scrimmage with active hands, catching blockers off guard and making them pay for poor technique. He's an experienced player and uses his leverage to drive blockers back. One example of his great use of leverage. He will throw everything in the kitchen sink at anyone who stands in his way. Unfortunately, though, there are some concerns There are some concerns, though, as some of his pass rush skill set is generally ineffective. He lacks ideal power to bull rush, and he has a lethargic spin move that just often ends up slowing him down. While he's got a lot of experience, on the flip side, you're getting an older prospect. You're getting a guy who's going to be 24 in his first season. While he's a respectable athlete, he doesn't really stand out too much from the crowd. It's hard to imagine him producing in games against sound blockers with adequate size, so he could be a hot and cold guy at the next level. Overall, I think his game will translate. It's just a question of how much of it does. So my grade for him, still a middle of the second round guy. So good prospect. I watched North Carolina State, Ohio State, and Oregon State all from the 2023 season. Now getting into our next guy here, I've got Walter Nolen. We're really getting into these top prospects at this point. Guys that I think have a ton of upside and could be really good starters in the NFL. Nolen flashes a little bit of that. And I want to make clear, I think we have a couple guys like this, Deone Walker being an example. His position I listed, it's DL, right? Because he's not just a defensive tackle. He plays everything. He can go out to the edge as well. So this is a guy with a lot of experience and versatility playing across the formation, and I think he does a lot of it at a pretty high level. He is a good overall player when we're talking about his length. A lot to work with there. 6'4". He is 290 pounds, so not a huge guy, but there is room to add mass on. He is a very good athlete. He moves really fast. The way I described him was that he's almost like a player that has the movement skills of a pass rusher playing from the edge, combined with some of the strength of an interior defensive tackle. And that's what's really fun about Walter Nolen, is he's kind of the best of both worlds. He plays with a relentless motor. He's super twitchy. One of my favorite plays I saw of him wasn't in my film evaluation, but it was something I found on Twitter where he goes down early in the play, but he's such a springy athlete that he sees the run coming at him and he just jumps straight back up into the air, lunges at the guy, and takes him down the backfield. This is a great athlete for your defensive line with a crap ton of upside. He has explosive movement. It's not consistent all the time, but it's there. He's a guy who, as far as leverage, he plays super low to the ground and he has the strength to hold up. So a little bit of like what we talked about with Byron Murphy last year. Not the same level. Murphy's a special player in that regard, but Nolen's got a little bit of that to his game. He also plays with a super high level of physicality, and he can win with long arms and forklifts as a pass rusher. He's got some moves to his arsenal. He's a strong tackler as well. His last miss was, I think, like week 7 of 2022, but it was from over a year ago. He has flashes of greatness on film, and if he puts it all together, easily is a first-round prospect. But that's the big question. Is he going to put it all together? He's transferring to another program. He hasn't been this dominant every game defensive lineman. He's got to do that to be able to earn that first round consideration, but he is close. Getting any concerns here, even though his strength is solid, I do think that he could reach an ideal playing size by sacrificing a little bit of athleticism and adding on a little bit more mass, adding on strength through that. I think he would be a nice player to get up to maybe 300. I'd like to see him get around there. Still think he could get out to the edge a little bit, but that would probably be ideal for him. But does it work where he is right now? Yes, just a little bit of a nitpick there. He is also just generally a pretty raw prospect. He relies almost solely on power moves. Given his power moves are pretty well developed with the forklifts that he's putting out there and bull rushes and all that stuff, but he's just got to do that more consistently. There's flashes of that. He did not play a large portion of snaps in 2023 as well, so that's a question as well. Is he going to be able to play at that high level for an entire game? Is he going to do that for 600, 700 snaps a year? Those are the big questions, right? And so you want to see that. And final thing I wrote here, a little bit with that size, he can get driven back and run defense. So sometimes he holds that point, sometimes he doesn't. It's a little bit inconsistent, I just like to see him add on that bit of mass to be able to do it, focus more on being an interior guy that kicks outside once in a while. I think that's where he'd probably be his best. But getting into my summary here, I say he's a versatile defensive lineman with elite upside as a prospect. He has good length and the athleticism you'd expect from a power rusher lining up on the edge. He has flashes of explosiveness, and he plays with good twitch, making life hard for blockers. He can rush from a lower stance, which provides him a leverage advantage against blockers, which he could, otherwise improve his usage of. Currently, he wins primarily with power, displacing blockers with long arms and forklifts, and he can consistently make tackles when asked to. His primary issue is that he's still a generally raw prospect. He has room to add mass, which can help him match interior blockers and shed the label of being a tweener. He must also develop a more refined pass rush arsenal that goes beyond power. He can struggle with leverage as well, despite it being mostly a natural advantage, getting pushed back in run defense or lacking the power to rip blockers from their anchor. Finally, he needs to prove that he can play a full-time role as he logged less than 400 snaps in 2023. If the grass is truly greener in Ole Miss, Nolen could take a step forward and establish himself as a special prospect. So my comp here, I went with Keon White, who I believe he might have been a first-round pick. He was close, I think. But both guys with big frames, really good athleticism. It's stuff that if you kick him out to edge, he can do it there. And he has a strength that holds up inside. Both prospects also played with high motors. They found their success with power moves, but ultimately just had to widen their pass rush arsenal to other methods. They're also both players that were good block shedders that really did it through violence. So I like the comp there. That's a player that was really good coming out. He was a late riser. I think originally seen as like a fourth, and at the end of it was either a late first or early second. So I could see Nolen making it into the first round, and if I had to bet, probably would say he makes it there. Not sure if it's early, but I think he can sneak in. So my film reviewed for him, I watched Miami, Florida, Auburn, and Tennessee, and I have him as an early second round prospect right now. Now, getting into our final second round prospect, and this was pretty close for me on whether he was going to make it into the first or not. Let's Tyleik Williams. So, I really liked what I saw here. He's got long arms, and he's got great mass. 6'3", 327 pounds. The height is not incredible, but the other stuff here is really good. He has speed and explosion that is just ridiculous. And you would almost expect him to be 50 pounds lighter with the way he plays the game. You'd think this guy's like 280 if you didn't say that he was like 330 on the field. He also is very good at shedding blocks. He has a very strong power profile. When his leverage is on point, he can easily move blockers. He plays a very physical game. He seriously challenges the anchor of blockers. His hand strength as well, it allows him to rip blockers to the ground or simply just move them out of position. So you can see him stack a guy and shed him, bring him down to the ground, and just simply run by. He also does those extra things that you like to see. They're not the big things, but he does them, right? He gets his hands up for passes, tries to swat the ball, whatever it may be. There's good effort on film from him, and you really like to see that. He's also someone who's already dominant against the run when in position, and teams don't really run towards him often. So, good stuff there. Not perfect, but a ton to work with for Tyleik Williams for the positives. Now, getting into my concerns, late in the season, when you're looking at like PFF grading, there was a clear fall off about halfway through the year. I kind of wonder if this is the reason why he came back to college, or just, I think more likely is just returning, because I know a lot of guys came back to Ohio State this year, try to go win the Natty. It's a good team. You could definitely see it. Pretty much every player who was on the edge ended up returning, so that's why we have a lot of prospects from that school in this class that we've talked about so far. So maybe a little bit of it is struggling late in the season, but probably more so just trying to return with his teammates. He's also someone that the pass rush arsenal, well, I think it's a little bit above average. It has room for development, and right now it's just mostly a power profile. So it's just these power moves. He needs to be able to build on top of that. He also needs to resort to counters more often. He gets content just trying to win with power. You don't like to see that. You want to see him keep trying stuff, going to second moves, anything you can do. Throw the kitchen sink at him. He's also occasionally out of position against the run. Not all the time, but once in a while, just doesn't go to the right spot. It's also a matter of really just his impressive tools making an impact. He's got everything here, right? Everything you're going to need to succeed is here with Tyleik Williams, but he has to be able to harness that together and get the impact that you should see out of that kind of player. So a very prototypical guy. He's just got to build on that. Getting into my summary here, though, I say he's a toolsy defensive tackle with a great baseline of size and speed. He plays as if he's below 300 pounds and has the power you'd expect from a big defensive lineman. He uses his power to shed blockers by force, ripping them to the ground or moving them out of position. He plays a physically imposing game that challenges blockers. As a run defender, he shows dominance, consistently finishing plays when he's within range of the ball carrier. He anchors well on the interior, eliminating potential rushing lanes. And as a pass rusher, he has some good moments where he wins with power, but he doesn't have the refined skill set, which limits him against top teams. He often gets comfortable playing with power and sits too long on blocks without countering. He has all the tools to succeed, but this season should be about learning how to use them properly to dominate for the Buckeyes. So tons of potential here. Could easily be a first-round prospect, but just got to prove it this year with his performance. Everything's there to do it. My pro comp for him, I don't think this is the perfect one, but Devon Hamilton, size is a little bit different here, right? Williams is a little more stout of a player. Devon's maybe more of like a taller, muscular guy, although they're both obviously pretty muscular. Both players win with immense power, and they have above average athleticism for the position. They're also both guys that play with mean streaks, and they can win early on snaps. They can dominate blockers with power, but they just need to develop a pass arsenal beyond that. And this is kind of talking about how they were coming out of college, to clarify that as well. They're both guys who are strong in run defense, but ultimately were upside projections with high floors because of their physical profiles. So guys with a lot to work with, but just have to prove it, right? And Tyleik Williams has another year to prove that in college football. So early second round guy for me. I watched Notre Dame, Penn State, and Michigan from the 2023 season. I will say this as a side note. I cannot wait until the day that I don't have to watch Notre Dame versus Ohio State once again. I watched that game like probably 50 times by now, I think, just watching prospects from it, because there's so many guys from those two schools, from last class and this class. It's overwhelming. Now, getting into our top three here, we have 3 first round guys, and the first one, I was so excited watching him. There's so much to work with here, but there's just this like specter of, are there off-field issues? And I don't know the answer to that. I really don't. There's reason to believe it, there's reason not to, but it's innocent until proven guilty, right? I don't want to go destroy someone's character before you actually know if they did or not. Plus, we're not here to destroy people's character, so we're not going to do that in the first place. Talking about Bear Alexander, though, out of USC. Just some weird stuff here off the field, but outside of that, if it wasn't for that stuff, first round pick easily. And I haven't ranked as that, right? Because if I really believe what I say, I'm not going to factor that into the evaluation. But oh my gosh, like, you watch a game of this guy and you can understand why he's a good prospect and why he's going to have an impact at the next level. Just ridiculous stuff here. He is phenomenal at shedding blocks. He plays with impressive power, is just constantly overwhelming blockers. When we talk about his name, Bear Alexander, he plays like a bear. It's the perfect name for him. He looks like a freaking bear on the field that's just mauling people. It's so much fun to watch. And I recommend, if you want to watch guys from this class, start with Bear Alexander. Probably the most enjoyable watch of this class. He also, kind of a small note here, talking about his pursuit on plays. You can see some of this like high IQ stuff from him where he'll just take a great angle. He'll understand when the play is going to get bounced outside, and the second it's happening, the moment it's happening, he's taking the perfect angle to get out there. So he's just constantly a guy that's looking to make the perfect play. And a lot of the time it works. And that's what puts him in the first round. He had a really impressive amount of pressures from the interior in 2023. He's constantly pushing the pocket, constantly collapsing it. He's an incredibly quick player, and he's going to overwhelm blockers. Explodes off the line faster than anyone I've ever seen. He is oftentimes in position taking on blockers before blockers are in their stance. I mean that. Like, he is ready before the offensive line is. And he's not jumping. Like, it's not like he's getting away with penalties. He just knows what's happening. It's crazy to watch. It's hard to miss him on the field. Constantly involved in plays, constantly in the game. Ridiculously physical. Blue chip grade there. He will take it to blockers. He will put them at the brink. It's going to be fun to watch this guy play this year. It's going to be fun to watch him play against the great players in the NFL down the road in 2025. I hope that's when he declares. We'll see, of course. He has a really impressive chop move that can be an effective counter. It's like one of the most enjoyable plays I watch from him, where it just looks like he's bringing down the hammer of God on a guy. I mean, he brings his arm up right above his head and just destroys the guy. If he hit him in the head, he'd probably crack his skull open. But he has a great chop move. He can get blockers' hands down. He will throw everything at them to keep them from engaging with him. He has a nasty spin move as well. It looks like he's an edge rusher when he's pulling this thing off. And he can use a swim move too. So he has some arsenal to his game. Not a huge, massive one, but it's better than a lot of guys here. He is going to blow through gaps constantly. If you're like calculating how often he's in the backfield and how often he's not, I'm convinced he's in the backfield more often than not. This guy just finds a way in. He knows the quickest way to the quarterback or to the running back at all times. He constantly was demanding double teams on film. And the only time he's not making an impact is when he's battling to the death with two guys. And he still is having some success in those regards. As a processor, and this is kind of a plus and a minus, he's a ridiculously fast processor. He looks like, I don't know, it looks like he knows the play before it happens. But what happens too is he rushes it at times. And that's kind of where we start these concerns, where he's always looking to make the big play, right? And he will get in position and be so close a lot of the time, and he might just miss a tackle at the last second. He could have a 5-yard loss he's putting on a running back, and he'll just miss the tackle. He gets too excited. So that's kind of the big issue here, and if he fixes that, man, he's probably early first. He's probably best guy in this class, arguably, you know, considering what our prospects do too, because there's some other guys here with some upside. But other concerns here, mostly average size. I do think he has pretty long arms, but 6'3", 313 is good. Not insane, right? But good. He is still relatively fine though with size, but it's not what you see from like a Kenneth Grant, who's going to be coming up soon on this list. Like I said before, got to clean up the tackling. Not as big of an issue as some other guys here, but that's the one of the big limitations of his game. He could also widen his pass rush arsenal. He already has a good arsenal of moves, but just throw in more, make it that much harder for guys. There are also times where he can get comfortable battling with blockers and just not counter. So he needs to do counters more often. He can also get overzealous and miss tackles or hits altogether. So processing the play a little bit too quick, or just not finishing all the good stuff he's doing right off the snap, and all of it being for nothing, just happens a little bit too much. He's often looking to penetrate the line as well on run plays, which sometimes just takes him completely out of the play, or he gets outside of runs, or if they're bouncing it outside and you're just trying to penetrate up the middle, you might get through and then he's already outside the tackle. So he's got to refine that a little bit, but there's just still so much upside there that it's still an A for me. A minus, that is. He can also get fatigued at moments, given his explosive style of play. What are you going to expect? I mean, if you watch him on film, you can understand why that happens. So, a little bit of a nitpick, but I don't think he's someone who's playing every single snap, but he'd be a hell of a part of a rotation. And then, final concern here, I mentioned it before, character concerns might be an issue. There's two things I've heard about that I don't know 100% for sure, but the rumor is that his teammates at Georgia, because he transferred last year, played USC 1 year, did not have good things to say about him. Might have been some issues in the building there, and usually not a good thing if you're leaving Georgia for those reasons. And then the other thing as well was from this offseason with like transfer concerns. He was apparently going into the portal, it was reported, and then he said he wasn't. I don't think there's anything there on that, but just weird things. That's more so what it is with Barry Alexander. There's nothing like, I haven't heard an actual story of something bad he's done, but there's people hinting at it, and I just don't know what to do with it. I'm not going to do anything with it for now because I don't want to take the guy down for something he hasn't done, right? I'd rather know for sure, and it's just something to more so monitor with this player. But man, like, I could almost convince myself to put him first overall, but it's just a little bit of those questions. Maybe the how assured I am that he's going to be a top prospect and if he's going to work out. And there's maybe just a little bit more concerns with him than the top two guys. But right there, I think these top three players we're talking about are neck and neck and neck. Getting into my summary, though, I don't have a comp for him. I say he's a game-changing defensive tackle with a lethal combination of explosion, processing skills, and physicality. He's a master at shedding blocks. He penetrates the backfield on most of his snaps. He was constantly pushing the pocket and pressuring the quarterback. He is lightning quick off the snap, often engaging with blockers before they can enter their stance and creating instant havoc. He plays a physically imposing game that will take blockers to the break. He has an array of pass rush moves to work with, showing a lethal chop move, spin move, swim move, and plenty of power rushes. I do have some concerns with him that are mostly minor, though. While he is a lightning quick processor, he often can rush plays and miss the big hit, throwing away all the hard work he does to have that opportunity. He can also occasionally get comfortable with his bull rush and neglect counter moves. Given his relentless style of play, he can get fatigued and needs to be rotated out of the game at moments. The only major issue that could present itself, although it's unproven, is the potential of character issues. There were reports of teammates being upset with him during his time at Georgia that raised the potential issue, but he shouldn't be attributed with this unless it's proven true. He has the potential to be a special player in the NFL, and I would put my bet on that. So, middle of the first round guy, if these character issues don't come up, and he has another dominant season, I think he's an early first round pick. I think people are just behind the ball on him. He's looked at as like a second round guy right now. I have no clue how you can watch him and come to that conclusion, but I'm not a perfect evaluator either, so I could be wrong on him. But just someone I absolutely love the film on, blew me out of the water, probably going to be a my guy at the end of the day. Film I watched for him was Arizona, Notre Dame, and Washington, all out of the 2023 season. Now, getting into my top two guys, we're going to have the same school for both of them. You know that if you know the class at all. It's Kenneth Grant and Mason Smith. And I have Grant at second here, although I do actually think by the end of the year, if he takes another step forward, I might take him over Mason Smith. Sorry, not Mason Smith, Mason Graham. I always get those names mixed up. Graham was a good player. We'll get to him, but didn't blow me away to the level I was expecting. So it's pretty close here with all three of these guys. Getting into positives with Kenneth Grant. Great overall length and tons of mass. He carries his weight really well, and he moves really fast for his size. He plays anywhere on the interior. You can nose tackle, a defensive tackle. Talking about that size for a moment, and like getting back to Deone Walker for a second. Kenneth Grant is listed 9 pounds lighter than Deone Walker. If you simply look at pictures of these two guys, you can see what I mean when I say that Deone Walker doesn't carry his weight well at all. You just look at the top half, right? And there's a huge difference there in these two guys. I think Grant is built phenomenally, and when you're talking about these top 3 prospects I have, he is clearly the one with the most upside. Undoubtedly with the most upside, because he has this ridiculous combination of physical and athletic gifts to his game. He also has some development as a player that he's done. He's not a guy who's just super raw. He can chop at blockers' arms. He has active hands. He doesn't get content with just using his force. He will try to pull moves. He will make blockers pay for lunging. He will take advantage of that. He'll beat him with a swim move. He can drive blockers back with his long arm as well. So you see these different moves that he has to his game. So nice stuff to see. Low missed tackle rate. He's a good tackler. Against the run, he's a great asset. He's nearly the highest grade I'm going to give. He does a really good job as well getting off of blocks, very high end there. And he will pursue in the open field, and he'll have a legit shot at making the tackle. You can find plays where he'll run down the running back. Given the running back's got obstacles, of course, but like not enough to where you're not impressed with what Grant's doing on the field. There's just ridiculous upside with Kenneth Grant, and he'll probably, when we do our way too early mock draft, which I'll do once we finish up summer scouting, Grant will probably be one of those guys you consider as a first round pick in the middle of the round. So great player. A lot of fun stuff here. He could end up being the top defensive tackle for sure. Wouldn't be shocking. My concerns with him, though, I do think he could resort to his arsenal of pass rush moves at times. Active hands is a good thing, but you want to see some logic and reason to what you're doing, and Grant's got to show that a bit more. He also lacks some explosiveness because of his size, but it's still mostly above average, especially considering he's 339. I mean, talking about if he was 310, the stuff is still above average. So it's great to see, but it's obviously a little bit limited. He's also someone who has not played more than 500 snaps in a season, so that's not terrible, but you want to see that go up a little bit. And he also has played about that much throughout his entire career. So really his only starting experience is mostly down to the 2023 season. He'll also occasionally make a bad guess on where the ball is going. But ultimately, I don't have a ton of things bad to say about Kenneth Grant. Getting to my summary here, he is a size speed freak with phenomenal play from the interior of the defensive line. He carries his weight about the best of anyone I've seen, and he moves great despite everything on paper indicating otherwise. He predominantly plays defensive tackle, but I think he has all the traits of a game-changing nose tackle. He's already dominant against the run, he clogs up the middle, and consistently gets the job done. As a pass rusher, he has a surprising arsenal of moves, chopping at blockers' arms, using swim moves when they lunge, and even pulling out a long arm. His development, for the amount of experience he has, is astonishing. He's already a top prospect, but he still has some things to prove. He's only played 507 snaps in his career, so questions have to be asked about what kind of workload he can handle. He's not an explosive player, given that should be expected, and he can resort to his pass rush arsenal more often. At times, Grant will take a bad guess at where the ball is going and be out of position, but this is a minor problem. I'm a huge fan of the upside here and view him as a great interior defensive lineman who's proving he can ascend from an impact player to an X factor. So my comp here, I went with Jordan Davis. Davis is a very special player. I don't know if Grant is to that level completely, but I think he's close. these are both prospects who carried a ton of mass, very similar sizes, but just had ridiculous athletic gifts for that size. I don't know if Grant can match what Jordan Davis did at the combine, but I think he could have some very impressive numbers. And then Davis is also a bit taller. I think he was like 6'6". So Grant, talking about comparing him to Davis, kind of an upside comp as far as the like physical and athletic gifts. But there were questions with both these guys about snap counts, how often they were on the field. Can you handle a full workload? And these were both guys that, coming out, dominant run defenders, just got to show more as a pass rusher. And I think that Grant has shown more than what Jordan Davis did when he came out. And Grant's got a whole nother year. So a lot to work with there. I gave him an A. Think he could get to an A+, similar to Bear Alexander. But we got to see. He's got to prove it. The games I watched, Minnesota, Penn State, and Washington, and they were great watches, you know. So getting into our final guy here, who I'm not sure if I have him sticking here past summer scouting and into the season. We'll see, because talking about these last two guys, plenty of reason to see them elevating their stock even more. But the top guy right now is Mason Graham. I think he's the one who's kind of put his game together the most, but there's questions about how much more he's going to get, and we just got to see. But a lot of positives here, a long list of things. He's got a well-sized frame. He's got a respectable arm length. I don't think this is like overwhelming stuff, but above average, right? B- for size. It's stuff to work with. He has a wrestling background as well. This molds his game. You can see it very clearly on film. He plays with fantastic leverage at times, getting really low to the ground, which helps him drive blockers. He has explosion. He engages quick and can slip into gaps. He can win right off the snap. He gets twitchy before contact, and this can help him gain an early advantage on plays. He also, as a run defender, is not really driven off his point all that often, and the best way I can describe him, and this is where you kind of see the pro comp come in a little bit, which is more of a baseline, I think, for Mason Graham, but I say he's a ball of energy. That's really what he is when he's playing. He has a really nice swim move. Needs to use it more often, but that's a great part of his arsenal. He also chops at the arms of blockers to keep them from engaging, and he was more creative with his rushes as the season progressed. He's one of those guys, you saw him get better every game. First game I watched, I think I wrote on Twitter, I was like, I'm not sure if this guy is a first rounder. And then as soon as I wrote that, he like pulls out this incredible swim move on the next play and takes the guy down. And then you just start seeing it more and more and more. And so he's an ascending player. I just don't know how far he ascends. Like, where's the ceiling? But he got better very clearly. And I think that he's going to be very good in the NFL for sure. I don't think he's going to be a missed pick for anyone. But I'm also not convinced he's top 5 in this class. That's a big question for me. Other things here as well. You know, he's got a lot of strength in his arms. Wrestling background. I think that's a bit of it. Core strength as well. He can be moved around the defensive line too, so a little bit of play at edge, and he's a strong force on the interior of the defensive line against the run. Now, my concerns for him had a couple things here. He gets stuck on blocks too often, so he has to be a little bit better at shedding. He also occasionally can get collapsed on when he gets too low, so something happens once in a while when you play with that kind of leverage, but generally a good thing. He also needs to keep using his pass rush moves like he did late in the season. He's got to prove that that is who he is now, because before that, he was often just too content with fighting with pure strength. So, got to see that stay the way it is, continue to be better. And other things here, not consistently involved in tackles. Maybe they're just running away from him. I wrote in my notes here, which might be the case. I mean, when you think of the Michigan defensive line, even with Kenneth Grant there, like Mason Smith is the guy who's proven himself the most. And that's probably the guy you want to run away from, but not really great options when you're playing against Michigan for where you want to run the ball. Final concern here, he does miss too many tackles, needs to clean that up a little bit, but still great prospect. My summary for Mason Graham, I say he's a ball of energy that dominates the interior of offensive lines. His game was founded around his wrestling background and built on refinement. Watching games from earlier in 2023, it was almost a letdown at times because he got stuck on blocks and just kind of relied solely on physicality to win. But that's not what he is anymore. He took a huge leap in the second half of the season, relying on his arsenal of pass rush moves to dominate blockers. He already showcased great athletic ability, such as his ability to out-leverage blockers by getting low, but he was twitched up, he was chopping at the arms of blockers, pulling spin moves, and often resorting to a swim move. He was winning in a multitude of ways. In run defense, he's held up consistently, taking up blockers in the middle and doing his part. My only concern was his limited amount of tackles and some misses on film. He can get reduced by blockers when he gets low, but that's pretty much the end of the concerns list. He needs to show this season that he's the same player he was to finish 2023, and anything else is just icing on the cake. Given his level of refinement, he should be an early first-round pick. So my pro comp here, this is more of a baseline for him, but he reminded me a lot of Braden Fisk. I just think he's younger is the main difference, and maybe is a little more refined of a prospect. But these are both guys that, best way to describe them, balls of energy. Had impressive core strength, played with high motors. They're both prospects, though, that kind of lack that great length. Although I do think Graham is better suited for... Okay, actually. All right, let me say something funny here that I realized recently, because my notes got to be updated here. I originally thought Braden Fisk was 6 foot tall. I don't know how this happened last year, but I had him down as 6'1.5" in my scouting notes, and just learned recently he's like 6'4", 6'5". So just wanted to note that really quick because this kind of screwed up my notes for a moment. I didn't realize this until after. I looked at Braden Fisk's scouting profile on the NFL website. I was like confused because I saw 6'4". I'm like, he's not 6'4". Well, he is, and my evaluation for Braden Fisk last year was pretty much thrown in the trash because I had him as like a late second rounder, and I didn't even have the right size for him. I was off by like 4 inches, and I would have probably put him as an early second for me. So my note here is actually incorrect. I'll have to fix that. But Fisk is a little bit taller than Graham is, actually. And getting back to the comparison, though, both athletically gifted players, they can threaten in a multitude of ways. Difference here, Fisk broke out late in his career. Graham is doing it earlier, and Graham is a bigger player. He's 318. Fisk was probably closer to 300, so Graham's got a little bit on him there. But did just want to throw that out about Fisk because, well, it's a pretty big miss by me last year. I don't know how it happened, how it got in my notes that way, but that was something I realized recently. So Mason Graham, one of my 3 players who gets a middle of the first round grade. This is a good class, right? I don't think it's like one of the best classes we've ever had. It's close to an ideal class because you're usually looking for like the large amount of top end talent and the depth and the meat that goes throughout the class, right? And I think you have that depth there. The top end talent could be there at the end of the season. They all got to take a little bit of a step forward. But there's a lot of guys who are first round picks. It's just, I don't know how early in the first round I'm taking them. And that's what's got to kind of be proven this year with their play. But that's what I've got. We had 11 prospects there. Some really good players at the top. A lot of depth throughout, so a lot to work with. But overall, I think it's an exciting defensive tackle class, and class that a lot of teams got to consider getting a prospect from, because I think there's going to be a lot of people who have pretty good NFL careers. Just pick your choice. You know, what do you want on your team? What do you need? A lot of different options at the buffet here. But that's all I've got for you guys today. Next week, we'll have our final positional episode. We'll do quarterbacks. I will just go ahead and preface that I'm not the greatest quarterback evaluator. I'm going to do my research for it. But obviously, with Trevor Lawrence having been drafted by the Jaguars, not a position I've looked at a ton, but definitely going to do my research this year. And after that, we'll have our wrap-up video where we do all the guys that kind of got missed throughout. There's some good names on there we'll talk about. So we'll get to that. But hoping by the end of July, we're done with this. And I really think that's going to be the case. So thanks for watching. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Let me know your thoughts on this class, who you've got as the top guys you disagree with on here too. Wouldn't mind hearing it. There's always going to be things we missed, why we listen to podcasts, why we listen to other people's opinions. Helps us challenge our thoughts and hopefully have better outcomes and better thoughts on the process and the players. So appreciate it. Hope you all have a great rest of your day. And finally, go Jags.